I'm joined by Ruthie Bloom and Dan Perry for a sharp, no-holds-barred conversation about power, timing, and what comes next.
I have difficulty conceiving of Trump, whose public appearances are frequently incoherent and very often full of nonsense, and whose philosophy about the world is very inconsistent, as having a message for anyone. I think he acts based on some notion of what is in his political interest, of what makes him look like a winner. I have difficulty buying motives that are pure and ideological. And when it comes to regime change, Trump has been all over the map. I mean, his original posture was that the U.S. was wrong in getting involved in forever wars in other people's countries with other people's interests. Indeed, just last month, his national security strategy openly disdained the idea of promoting democracy, correctly noting that in some cases it was attempted as an imposition on societies that maybe weren't ready for it in various ways. So the idea that he's trying to impose democracy on another country strikes me as fantastical. On the other hand, sure, regime change had been attempted in the past by the U.S. and other countries, but it had largely been discredited because of the traumas of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I actually have bemoaned that. I, in recent years, have criticized the Biden administration, before that Obama, for being so weak on a global stage, which left a vacuum that was filled by jihadists and bad faith players of every kind, from dictatorships in the Arab world and elsewhere to Putin, and we see the result, and it might embolden China. So it would be hypocritical of me to criticize this action. The problem lies elsewhere, in the fact that after the rather impressive lightning strike that abducted Maduro, ridiculous and kind of comic as that may be, we see two problems. One is that they haven't really changed the regime. It looks like Trump is inclined to maintain the Chavista regime and do deals with them. And the second is, if you're going to be basically interfering in other countries' affairs with very dubious legality, and we can get into the arguments, but trust me, the bottom line is it's dubious in terms of legality. You don't want to appear like a usurper hours later on international television saying we need access to their oil. That was ugly and very, very foolish. So as for Iran, sure. If I was the Iranian regime right now, I'd be thinking, well, maybe with, success comes more appetite, and they might be emboldened to actually interfere. And the real message, and I can get into this later, is vis-a-vis the Iranian army. The Iranian army is a very important player here. Can I spend a second on that?
Spend 1 minute, but I want to give her...
The Iranian army is not really part of the theocratic regime. They're very different from the Revolutionary Guards, and they played a very pivotal role in 1979 when, indeed, the Shah was drummed out of Iran, but there was not clarity about what would happen. A month or two later, Ayatollah Khomeini returns from France, and within months, they set up a referendum on whether the Iranian people want a theocracy, and it was completely faked. And 99% supposedly voted in favor, and the catastrophic result lies before us in ruins. The army enabled that because they were timid. I have no doubt the army regrets having allowed that to happen. Now, many revolutions that we consider to be revolutions were actually in a one way or another military coups. I've seen that personally in Romania in 1989 and in Egypt in 2011. Usually, in reality, it's the army betraying the dictator. In theory, that could happen in Iran as well, and Trump's actions and statements may give them something to think about.
For sure. Now, I want to go back, though, to Trump's actions, because in some sense he opened a Pandora's box. You know, you talked about it. It was this sweeping move. He brings the president over to the United States. Now he has to meet these expectations. He needs to get access potentially to that oil. He needs to hopefully have regime change in Venezuela and actually have this impact the rest of the world. Can he stand up to it, or is this actually a little bit dangerous to kind of open this can of worms but not be able to actually carry through?
Well, of course it's dangerous, but here's what I think. I think that, you mentioned the jihadists, Dan. It's interesting because Latin America is not jihadist, but has housed Hezbollah and terrorists, paid for them and housed them. But their culture, Latin American culture, is different from radical Islamist culture, all right? So, and that's crucial here. Because aside from whether the regime is still the Chavist regime, and that's true, I mean, that's what happened with the Soviet Union. It fell, but then you have Putin, who's actually left over from Soviet Russia.
And a big nostalgist.
Right, exactly. And that is a problem. But what is important here, in my opinion, is his attack on Hezbollah, on the drug trafficking, on the terrorists That is what ties in to Gaza and Iran and everywhere else. That part of it is very crucial.
It's not indefensible when he chooses to retain bits and pieces, well, the essence of the regime, at least for a while, because that could be framed as the learning of a lesson from what happened in Iraq. In Iraq, we deposed a dictator who probably was the essence of his dictatorship. But we went on to destroy the Ba'ath Party, and that left a vacuum, the result of which was complete incoherent government in Iraq for years, and the rise of al-Qaeda in the country, and eventually the mutation of Islamic State. That is now seen as a mistake. So leaving Chavismo in place, at least for a while, can be seen as a practical concession to reality, the kind of thing that, in fact, perhaps Trump should be applauded for. The real issue here is whether Marco Rubio is playing a significant role, and of course, Trump is making noises like Rubio now runs the country. That's probably unrealistic. And it may be that Rubio himself is driven to an unhealthy degree by his own obsession with Cuba because his parents come from Cuba. On the other hand, Rubio may be the only standard Republican normal in this administration. he could be trusted in ways that Trump and Pam Bondi and the others just cannot. And maybe Rubio will be the author of a rational transition.
But now, one of the other things that I think was rather surprising was the fact that Israel actually was unaware that this was going to go on. Not that Israel has to be privy to everything the United States is going to do, but it certainly seems to work the other way around. And as we mentioned, there is some impact or some reverberations around the Middle East and some of our allies and enemies who are impacted by this move. So are you surprised that Israel was surprised? And how could Netanyahu have been more prepared for this to happen over the weekend?
I don't believe he was surprised. The same way that I don't believe necessarily the U.S. was surprised by Israel's attack on Qatar. This is public theater. It's in everyone's interest that Trump should, project that he's not in any way the tool of Israel. I strongly suspect that there was at least an indication, but I can't prove it. What I can say is Netanyahu's main interest here is the weakening of Hezbollah and Hamas. And as Ruthie said, the money train that does go through, in some cases, Latin America, and alongside Cuba, Venezuela is, in fact, by any measure, Venezuela is was the main player. They're weakening Hezbollah and global jihadism, implicitly weakens Iran. Venezuela was potentially a part of Iran's sanctions busting. Weakening Iran is an excellent thing for Israel. I would add, weakening the Iranian regime is an excellent thing for the Iranian people. Many Iranians right now are begging Israel to get involved. And there is pressure on both Israel and America to seize the moment because of the riots in Iran post the June humiliation that they suffered could create a real opening.
So, Ruthie, turning to you just for a moment when we talk about the protests in Iran, obviously they're gaining more and more steam day by day. And on the other hand, the Iranian government is kind of crushing them more and more day by day, certainly after the attack that happens in Venezuela. So at what point do we see these protests as actually being strategically significant? As Dan mentioned, during the 12-day war, there was actually a call for Israel to help to bring about regime change. But in fact, Trump put a stop to that and said, no, not now. Is something different today? And do you feel that these protests might have more impact than meets the eye?
Well, what's different is that this time, even though the protesters are being gunned down by the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij militias, the whole structure there is so weakened, and I think that has emboldened the Iranians. One of the things that the Iranian people saw after the 12-day war was that Iran was more of a paper tiger than they had imagined. I think that Trump learned a lot from Israel's type of prowess. It's not that I'm saying that the Israeli army is more mighty than the American army. No, it's not. But there is something about the calculations about how you do a strike. And, he said there were 150 aircraft, whatever. Israel also prepared in that way, in a clever way. And I think that the U.S. Army learned a lot from Israel and maybe was even along the way coordinating it to some extent.
Well, where Israel excels is in covert operations that require cleverness and not necessarily scale.
Right.
America's advantage, of course, is scale. So Israel's actions over the past several years, its successes, really have been victories of that sort. And it shows a kind of daring and cleverness that also, alongside the PR hit that Israel took in the past 2 years, have created a lot of admiration. This type of landscape, where you're talking about covert operations and various little skullduggeries, as opposed to military invasion, need to be kept secret, need to be kept to a tight circle. Like Ruthie, I'm almost sure that Netanyahu was told about it at Mar-a-Lago, but I can't prove it. But of course, the timing strongly suggests it. And Trump would be right in saying such an action, as opposed to seeking approval for a military invasion, can't be one where you advise Congress in advance. Of course it cannot be. I assure you that Netanyahu did not advise the Knesset about the beeper operation with Hezbollah.
So let me ask you this. Even former Defense Minister Benny Gantz is calling on us to take advantage of this opportunity and to carry out some kind of attack inside Iran or to help with the regime change. Do you think that time is right for an attack? And if we would attack Iran right now, especially the growing ballistic missile arsenal, which we know is actually the greater threat than the nuclear arsenal right now, what would that look like? Would it be done with U.S. collaboration? Do you have a vision for that?
I don't think Israel or even the U.S. should explicitly engineer a regime change. What they should be doing is A, realizing regime change is extremely desirable, B, seeking to seize the moment if indeed the time is right, which it looks like it is, and then doing it in ways that look like, and indeed really are, from the ground up. And you can do that because there is so much real a grievance and dissent in Iran. Or the opposition in Iran, the sentiment towards the opposition is very strong. The support even for the Crown Prince Pahlavi is very, very strong. The military, as I say, is very wobbly, and the Revolutionary Guard probably just wants to preserve their economic interests, which is a case of complete and total corruption. So I would say some combination of working with the factors and strengthening the factors, combined with maybe pinpoint strikes at the right time on symbols of the regime, could really, really go a long way, not only in causing it to crumble and maybe causing Khamenei to seek asylum in Moscow, which would be a wonderful symbolic thing, but also to correct the mistake of June, because in June, the thing you're suggesting should really have been done, and at the very least, after the U.S. joined the assault and put paid to the nuclear program, because it really did, with the airstrikes at the end of the war, the U.S. should have presented Iran with surrender terms, which would have included a complete disavowing of any further meddling in the region with jihadist militias all over the place, undermining these Arab countries. That should have been non-negotiable at that point when the regime was supremely weak and was about to collapse anyway. Instead, Trump, impetuous and impatient and eager to declare victory, walked away from the whole thing. I think if he knows anything, he knows that was a mistake, and this would be a chance to correct it. Symbolism matters in such cases in history. Just like the last major symbol was Ayatollah Khomeini returning on a plane from France. If Khomeini flees Iran, the chances that regime survives are very, very low, much lower than the chances that Chavismo can survive the abduction of Maduro. Khomeini is such a symbol that, and the regime is so brittle anyway, that his departure would probably mean a very quick military coup and some version of Pahlavi returning or the opposition returning, massive Western influx, helping the country with investments and with intelligence operations. I think that would be the end. So it's not so fast that he's going to do this, but it's possible, and it should be encouraged. So behind the scenes, every maneuver should be done to encourage that one thing to happen, the flight of Khamenei.
The Jewish people have always had to live by the sword, and I don't think that's ever going to change. There are breaks, pauses in between the need to fight. Every post-war is a pre-war for the Jewish people, and so that's the pessimistic thing I can say. Optimistically, I think things are moving in a better direction, yes.
And 30 seconds, Dan, do you agree or disagree? Give me that 30-second vision.
It's very difficult to conceive of the likes of Trump and Netanyahu. Trump being a supporter of Putin, essentially, as the good guys on the world stage. But sometimes history works in strange ways. To channel Iran's own rhetoric, Venezuela was the small Satan, then Iran is the big Satan. And if 2026 sees a change in Iran, then maybe we can even hope for a change in Russia, and that is a whole new world. And then even I will say that Trump deserves credit.
Wow, well, a lot of Satans, but hopefully we can move towards something better.
We'll open champagne in the
That's
studio.
right, and we'll have a l'chaim. So unfortunately, we are out of time tonight, so we'll have to wait for that glass of wine next week. But I really want to thank all of our guests for being here, Dan and Ruthie.